Hi, this is Mark Graban. This is a webinar preview version of a talk that I'm giving at the Lean and Six Sigma World Conference in Las Vegas on April 3rd, 2018, titled Overreact Less, Improve More, and Manage Better, Leadership Lessons from Statistics and Psychology. So those of you who know of my work would probably frame me as a lean guy or a lean healthcare guy. But before I was ever exposed to anything about lean or Toyota, my foundation in quality improvement and management actually comes from Dr. W. Edwards Deming. I would probably call myself first a Deming guy. And Deming's philosophy is, of course, the foundation of the modern quality improvement movement, along with others, very influential to Toyota. I was thankful that my dad, when he worked at General Motors in the late 80s, had an opportunity to attend one of Deming's famed 4-day seminars. And so there was a copy of Out of the Crisis on the shelf, and it piqued my interest. And I read this book when I was in college. And when I was graduating, I really didn't want to work for General Motors. Having grown up around Detroit, the company had a certain reputation and wasn't really considered a great environment. I wanted to work for what I might have considered then a more modern company. But when I was interviewing with General Motors, we sort of discovered this interest in quality, and they pointed me to a factory that was actually in my hometown, Livonia, Michigan, the Livonia engine plant. And they said, this plant's different. They had something called the Livonia operating philosophy, and this was influenced directly by some exposure they had to Dr. Deming. It talks about communication, trust, respect, building quality, utilizing people's skills for personal and professional development, a dynamic process of change, a safe, high-quality environment. This sounded great. This sounded like the type of workplace I wanted to be in and help build this type of culture. Ironically, when I took the job, it didn't take long to learn that this had really been a passion project of a previous plant manager who had been previously promoted out of the way, and that the Livonia operating philosophy was no longer the daily reality of the plant, if it really ever had been. It had been reduced to a bunch of posters and slogans on the wall. And, thinking back to the song that was popular at the time, isn't it ironic that Deming, as much as he complained about slogans and posters and poor leadership, that's ultimately what we had at General Motors. So I moved on, and as I've learned more about lean, and I've learned from Toyota people, as I've visited Japan, these connections between Deming and lean practice, especially at Toyota, are still very strong. A previous chairman of Toyota, Shoichiro Toyota, once said, "There's not a day I don't think about what Dr. Deming meant to us. Deming is the core of our management." And just last month, when I was in Japan visiting hospitals, we had a hospital CEO talk about Dr. Deming and the influence that he had on what's now decades of total quality management practice within this Japanese organization. And they're building on top of that lean practices, 5S, visual management, lean management practices, lean being built on a core of the Toyota philosophy. So here in the United States and more broadly in recent years, there's been a trend especially in healthcare, to adopt practices that you might call lean daily management. You see huddle boards, goals, metrics, improvement work. And then at the more strategic level, you would see strategy deployment practices, trying to create top to bottom alignment in the organization around true north, goals, measures, prioritizing improvements. So for the most part, these are all good practices. I think they could be even better if we incorporated some of the best practice in statistical methods. But more likely, what we see if we go visit an organization are practices that are far from ideal. We might see just single data points posted on a whiteboard with a simplistic comparison against the goal. smiley face or some sort of nastier frowny clip art. We might see what we call bowling charts, more than one data point, multiple data points. But again, we have this kind of reliance on overly simplistic red and green color coding that doesn't help us see if we're improving. We might see the use of charts, but those charts might include dubious linear trend lines that maybe don't reflect a real improvement curve and certainly doesn't predict future performance. And we might see line charts, run charts combined with the red, yellow, green zones, which in the case here is sort of a recipe for overreaction, a recipe for over-explaining noise in the system instead of looking at things more systemically and using better statistical practices. So one other book that I was exposed to, again, I would have to say thanks to my dad and his experience at General Motors, is this book, Understanding Variation, The Key to Managing Chaos, written by Don Wheeler. You can see the photo here. I had a chance to meet Dr. Wheeler and hear him speak at a healthcare conference last year, which was a great thrill to be able to chat with him. And there were so many great lessons from this book. I can't recommend it highly enough. But when we look at the opportunity to apply these lessons of how to understand variation, how to manage systems, how to look at our metrics in a more helpful way, let's look first at a scenario that might be very typical in a lot of organizations. So let's say we have a software company that has a measure that they might look at new premium user registrations, and let's say this metric is about 86 on the first day. So we might have a leader come in and say, well, we want that to be higher. That means more revenue. That means more profit. That means better long-term chances of success. I'm going to set a goal. So they might set a goal at 90, and they'll come back the next day to a team huddle, look at the metric, and it's gone up to 92. But now this is considered green because it's higher than the goal. We have this binary good, bad, red, green view. Might kind of get a smiley face. The manager comes back the next day and sees that it's fallen below the goal, back into the high 80s. Not good. The team, gets told you need to do better. The manager maybe thinks, well, I patted the team on the back yesterday, and clearly they slacked off as a result. So they give, an inspirational pep talk, and performance improves. It's going up. We're back into the green zone. Makes the manager happy. They say, way to go, keep it up. Performance drops. It's still in the green, and then it drops below the red. Well, now the manager's ticked. Look, you've shown what's possible. Why don't you get 95 new user registrations every day? Why can't you perform like that every day? I think they're lighting a fire under the team. When they come back the next day, the performance is up. Oh, way to go. See, and this reinforces in the manager's eyes that kind of chewing people out inspired them to try harder, as if trying harder was, it's hardly ever the key variable in why performance is better. And then after, maybe we have a pizza party to celebrate, performance drops and the emojis get progressively more angry. So there's all this time and effort that goes into evaluating and reacting to each data point, asking people for explanations of a quote unquote bad data point and celebrating the good. But when we use methods that come from Wheeler's book, including a form of SPC chart called the process behavior chart, and we plot those data points, and we calculate an average, and we calculate upper and lower limits, we look and say, well, this is the very definition of a predictable system, that the same system is sometimes going to generate 80 new registrations a day, and sometimes it's going to generate 100. And any data point generally within those limits is going to be noise. And we have rules we can use to evaluate, to look for signals. A point above or below the limits, 8 points above or below the average are two of the key rules we'd look for, to find signals that tell us when it's a good use of time to ask what happened and when it's a good use of time to do root cause analysis. So I've seen this methodology really help change the culture in a team. It saves people and leaders time. We could call this the right way to do metrics. But as I've learned through my career, being right or being technically correct doesn't mean others will go along. We see the same thing happening in medicine when a new practice is developed, something that's considered to be a clinical best practice. It often takes 19 or 20 years for that to be accepted widely within healthcare. And this is when patient health, if not lives, are at stake. So I think, well, it's clearly got to be something more complicated than being right and telling people the right thing to do. So we often hear managers and leaders complain, sometimes change agents or black belts complain about resistance to change. I love this quote from the late Peter Schultes. People don't resist change, they resist being changed. So there's a difference between telling people what to do and engaging people in improvement. That's the power of the Kaizen approach to continuous improvement that should really be part of any organization's lean practice. We engage people in improvement, they are going to be less resistant to changes that they propose or changes they participate in evaluating. So in my own work, it's made me even step back and say, well, if I think people are being resistant to change, does it really mean something more like people are resistant to my idea? Am I not engaging them properly? Should I stop blaming them for resistance and find a better way to work with them? So I'll come back to Deming. If you look at his later book, The New Economics, what he described as his system of profound knowledge includes things like appreciation for a system, knowledge of variation, and learning and using methods like process behavior charts address those two of his 4 points in the profound knowledge system. Deming includes theory of knowledge, and he includes psychology. So Dr. Deming often gets labeled as a statistician, which I think sells him short and sells short his work. Dr. Deming himself said and wrote that the most important thing for managers to understand is the psychology of the people who work for them, the psychology of the individuals who work for them, the psychology of change. So in recent years, I've spent more time studying things in the realm of psychology and counseling and family therapy than I have been reading books about engineering or lean or methods like that. And I have dug deeper and read more of Dr. Wheeler's books beyond Understanding Variation. But as I've learned about, and somebody, it was kind of happenstance at a conference, somebody said, there was somebody with a social work background, and they said, well, you should learn about some of these things that are happening in the realm of addiction counseling. Not because she thought I was an addict, I don't think, but because she thought I would be interested in the difference between traditional counseling and newer, arguably better approaches. So when you read about traditional, older approaches that might still be practiced by some today, approaches to addiction treatment, it was generally built on the idea of shaming the addict and making them feel bad for being an addict, as if they might not already feel bad as it is. And the therapist would often tell them what to do. You should do this, you should stop doing that. And that often leads to a very natural pushback and resistance, and it turns out to be not very effective. But there's a newer approach, just a couple decades old, called motivational interviewing, which is proven to be much more engaging in helping people change, not just in the realm of addiction counseling, but in workplaces, including Toyota, where these methods have been taught to managers for a while now. So the book, Motivational Interviewing, the seminal textbook on this topic, it's actually quite readable. I don't know, I haven't read any other textbooks on counseling. This was actually a very good read, from Miller and Rolnick. They define motivational interviewing as a person-centered conversational style, a conversation style for addressing the common problem of ambivalence about change. So there's a different word there. And on my webpage, I've got links to a number of resources and books and podcasts that I've done with people in the spirit of learning these methodologies. But I think it's interesting they use the word ambivalence, resistance is such a negative word. And the second book that I read on motivational interviewing, you see here, is called Motivational Interviewing for Leadership, talking about applications to the workplace. And this book defines resistance, or resistance to change, as a term that seems to treat a normal part of the change process as abnormal or pathological, without recognizing how we as leaders or change agents may be contributing to the issue. So the word resistance really is criticizing the person who's not changing. The term ambivalence is, I think, a slightly less loaded term. It's recognizing the reality that this is a normal part of the change process, that change is never a matter of flipping a light switch. I learned a new way, I'm going to do it. Or in the workplace, you're taught a new way. Does that mean you're automatically going to do it? Well, no, you think about it. You're processing this new approach. You might, as former Toyota leader Ron Oslin says when teaching these methods, you might be addicted to the status quo. And addictions can be very tough to beat. It's, again, not like flipping a light switch. It's something that we have to work through. And hopefully we have somebody helping us through that change. So recently I was doing some work in a hospital. I was talking with a unit nurse manager who was supposed to be doing daily huddles, daily Gemba walks. She was struggling with getting out and doing this every day. And she was talking about this and she said, I'm stuck. And to me, this seemed like classic language of ambivalence. And so I asked her to tell me more about that. We heard what's described as both sides of ambivalence. Somebody who is ambivalent is said to be sitting on both sides of the fence, in some state between changing and staying in the status quo. So when someone's ambivalent, this is characterized by hearing, on the one hand, we'll hear change talk. This nurse manager said, I need to do those Gemba walks each day. So saying I should, I need to, I want to, I'm going to, I should, this is change talk, but it's balanced out. So what prevents progress? What prevents change? It's the sustained talk that's in our own head or it comes out in conversation. This nurse manager said, but it's really hard to make time. So as a coach, if I ask her, why is it hard to make time? She's going to engage in more sustained talk and talk about all the barriers and that's negative and that prevents change. As a coach, if I can steer her to articulating more change talk through the questions I ask, more change talk is a predictor of change actually happening. When change talk outweighs the sustained talk, it's proven that people are more likely to change. And I struggle with this myself in my own professional work, my own ambivalence. I'm working on a book, and in fact, I've just released the first couple of chapters in a process called Lean Publishing. Still working on the cover, and the title might even change, but it's called Measures of Success. But I had my own ambivalence about moving forward and taking action on this project. There was a long period of time where I was expressing weak forms of change talk. I need to write the book. I want to write it. I should write a new book. That in and of itself didn't lead to a lot of practice or progress. And there are times when I would get bogged down and say, well, I want to change, but I wasn't making it a priority. So change talk would include things like, I'm going to write it. I want to finish it. I will finish the book, as I'm committing to do so very publicly here by June. I'm going to finish the book. This is change talk. But it's been balanced out at times in my own head and in conversation with others with what we would call sustained talk. What I'm busy. What if people don't like the book? What if it doesn't make a difference? I can come up with all sorts of reasons that balance out the reasons to change. And for quite a while, that had me stuck in different stages of ambivalence. And so when we ask, how can we help someone get past ambivalence? I tried to sort of counsel myself through some of these methods. And when we're coaching others, telling people what to do is not the best strategy. But if we're not blaming people for being resistant to change, we want to be careful about blaming people, leaders, change agents, who tell others what they should do. Because what's called the righting reflex, the idea to help set somebody on the right path, this desire to fix what seems wrong and to set people on a better course, relying in particular on directing or telling people what to do from a place of expertise, this is absolutely human nature, to tell people what to do. Parents telling children, managers telling employees, speakers on stage telling people what they should do. It's human nature, it's well intended, but the challenge is it doesn't work. So we want to ask ourselves, do we want to be right? Do we want to stand on a soapbox and lecture people and tell them what they should do? Or are we really trying to help people change? What's called the spirit of motivational interviewing starts from a place of being committed to helping the person who needs the help. Being right, and whether it's a client or an employee or a patient you're coaching, if they're not changing, you're not being successful as a coach. So I saw a great example of the difference in this type of thinking, from telling to engaging people differently. I was at the Lean Coaching Summit last year. And there was a group, this is a nonprofit organization from the Oakland, California area called Beyond Emancipation. And they work with kids who are aging out of, they're becoming young adults. They're aging out of the foster care system. One of the women from this organization said this: I spent 8 years telling foster kids what to do, and it was exhausting. Because when we tell people what to do, again, even if we're right, it puts the person we're trying to help in a position of pushing back. We tell them what to do, we're right, that makes them wrong. That makes them bad. And the emotion there leads to a lot of sustained talk and pushback that can get in the way of adopting practices of becoming effective young adults. It can get in the way of the adoption of Lean or Six Sigma practices. It can get in the way of the adoption of methods like process behavior charts. If we're telling people to do it, they'll come up with reasons why they shouldn't. So instead of directing, instead of telling, there's a process in motivational interviewing of evoking change. So in the Lean approach and the practice of Kaizen and continuous improvement, hopefully it's well accepted that we wouldn't tell people how to fix their process. We're going to engage them or evoke ideas from them, drawing ideas out about what problems do you think we should solve? What would make your work easier? What ideas do you have that can be tested in a PDSA process? That, again, comes from Dr. Deming. But I think in the practice of Lean in recent years, there's been a lot of talk about starting from why. What's in it for me? What's in it for them? And a lot of people say, well, you need to start from why. They sometimes talk about a book by Simon Sinek, Start From Why. But there's this process that's happening in organizations and in the practice of Lean management of telling people what's in it for them, telling people why they should change. And this lesson that comes from the clinical addiction treatment realm is that it's far more effective to get the person that you're trying to help to articulate on their own what's in it for them. So you're evoking from them, you're guiding, you're helping, you're not manipulating the person to do what you want them to do. So in the workplace, if the motivational interviewing for leaders authors point out, we should only use motivational interviewing methods when we are legitimately interested in the ideas and of the person we're helping and when they are actually going to be given autonomy. So if there's a mandate that comes from the government or a regulatory group or from headquarters of something that just has to be done, it would be considered unethical to use this motivational interviewing process to sort of inappropriately guide somebody to what we want to do. But what's more effective in terms of change, getting people to embrace change and to participate in the process, comes from evoking and guiding. I think of an organization, a hospital lab I worked with probably about 10 years ago. We had done some work in the core lab to improve processes, teaching them lean management systems, trying to create a culture of continuous improvement. And when we went to do a second phase of work in the microbiology lab, we had a contract between the hospital and the group I worked with at the time that talked about certain goals, certain milestones, certain deliverables, talking about the methodology that we were maybe at the risk of pushing on people. And I thought, well, let me try an experiment. We gathered the lab staff, it was maybe about 10 people working in microbiology, and basically started with a flip chart and some post-it notes and a very open-ended question. What do you want to fix? What do you need to improve? What do you think we should do to create a better workplace and better patient care? I guess that was, it was a number of questions like that. And what we evoked from that team was basically the exact same list of goals that was in this proposal that was signed by management. Improving quality, reducing overtime, because you know what? Management didn't want to pay for overtime. The people working overtime wanted to get home at a predictable time each day so they could be with their families. So improving productivity in an environment where there was a commitment to no layoffs, evoking people's ideas helped us discover there was a lot of alignment around the interests of the team, the interests of the patient, the interests of the organization. So I think in that case, we illustrate what was learned by the group, the leaders at Beyond Emancipation. When they stopped telling people what to do, they learned, and they came to believe that the person closest to the problem is the closest to the solution. So if we're looking at situations, why and how would people adopt process behavior charts? The managers, the leaders, the people managing the departments are probably closest to the problem. Can we engage them? Can I effectively engage them through this new book in developing or at least buying into solutions? So in the workplace, we can use, when we think of change, change adoption curves, integrating, introducing change into the organization, the 4 motivational interviewing processes, I think, apply really well. And there's sort of a sequential flow here of first engaging the person or people that you're trying to help. You have to build relationships. You have to establish trust. That's something I saw even going back to General Motors when we got a new plant manager about a year into my time there. This new plant manager was one of the original GM people who was trained by Toyota at the NUMMI plant in California. He spent months not doing scripted, planned, organized Gemba walks. He spent months walking the shop floor by himself, engaging the people in that factory who had previously been blamed for all of the quality and productivity problems that existed there. He was engaging them, and that takes time. It's an investment in relationships that as an engineer or a statistician, you might not necessarily value, but I've come to value that after being in the working world almost 25 years. Thinking back to the theme again, that having the right answer isn't enough to inspire change. So we engage people, we focus the problem. When I worked with that microbiology lab, we started with a really big, broad, vague problem of we're under pressure to improve. We need to improve results. Well, we can focus the discussion of what problem is most important to solve. Maybe we can't solve it all right away, but we can reach agreement that here's something we should prioritize. So once we engage, we build that relationship, we focus and narrow down the problem, then we start evoking reasons for change. This is the motivation in motivational interviewing. You tell me what's in it for you, instead of me dictating what I think is in it for you. So we engage, we focus, we evoke, and then we talk about planning. What are our actions going forward? What do you think we're going to do? What do you commit to? And there's a risk if you jump to planning too quickly, you don't end up with change. You have a lot of pushback. You start using that word resistance. So you have to build relationships and establish the why in this joint conversation before you move ahead to the how, the what, and the when. And in this process, there's, I think, a friendly warning here. Don't assume that somebody wants to be coached. Sometimes people are told you need to improve. Sometimes addicts are told by a judge or by a spouse, you need to go to counseling. So you can imagine how awkward some of those first discussions might be. So why are you here? I was told to be here. That's the way some people might look and react sitting in Lean Six Sigma training. So you have to put time into building those relationships and meeting people where they are. When they're ready to be coached, they're ready to be helped, you can help them move forward in this change process. Because again, it sounds maybe faster to tell people what to do. The problem is it doesn't really work. It's not sustainable. So we use some of these skills of motivational interviewing. You can try to remember this with the acronym OARS. Open-ended questions. The Lean Coaching Summit had a lot of focus about this. Asking open-ended questions to help guide the discussion. But what's also helpful are affirmations, small bits of praise for somebody who's trying to change. Reflective listening, a form of active listening, of repeating back what you hear in a way that helps move the conversation along. Providing summaries. Well, what I hear you saying is this. And when we face somebody who's stuck, whether it's somebody in the workplace or it might be ourselves, 3 key questions that are helpful. Why would you want to make this change? Before we start talking about the what. And then we can talk about how might you go about it in order to succeed. We're still evoking. And 3, what are the 3 best reasons to do it? I asked this nurse unit manager, tell me, what are the top 3 reasons why you should be doing Gemba walks? That evoked more change talk. That helped her get on a more positive path of thinking, how can I make this happen instead of fixating on barriers. So as we wrap up here, I would propose as engineers, as Lean people, as whatever color belt you have, as leaders, let's reframe resistance. In different branches of quality improvement and systems thinking and Lean thinking, we focus on not blaming individuals for systemic problems in our processes. I would propose we can extend this to not blaming individuals for things that are basically part of our system that is called human nature. And instead of labeling people as bad, they're resistant to change. I love change, but they're bad. Let's consider resistance to change not a reason to label people and cast them aside and get them off the bus, you might say, but let's use this as a reason to engage people, to listen, to evoke, to draw out their reasons for change and to draw out their ideas. I propose that we'll be more successful. And final thought here, I can't tell you to adopt any of these methods for motivational interviewing any more than I can tell you to adopt process behavior charts. All I can do is invite you to learn more, invite you to try some new practices, and see for yourself if these things work for you. So with that, I want to thank you. I want to thank the organizers for having me here at the event. If you go to markgraban.com/LSS2018, you'll find a link to slides, resources, more information about motivational interviewing if you're interested, and information about how you can buy the first 3 chapters, the early initial Lean publishing release of my latest book, Measures of Success. I can't tell you to buy it. I can only invite you to take a look at it. So if you have questions, I'm going to be around the next couple of days. I would love to talk to you. You can email me. You can tweet at me. There's no shortage of ways to find me online. I would love to continue this conversation with you. Thanks.